And I would like to welcome all of you as the audience to the topic of mindfulness of speech. If what we eat determines what we are, it certainly would say that what we say would portray our own attitude to the world. People often are said to be careful what they eat, and lots of people are making huge amendments, changes in their diet, so that they don't become what they eat, so that they change the eating pattern, at least physiologically. I would like to believe there's more anatomical benefit by knowing what to eat that is healthy and enjoyable and very good for the body. And people have therefore learned to restrain from very things they like to eat or drink or enjoy or even expensive or even cheap. Realizing the harm that some of the things they eat has to their body and the mind as well. We're so conscious these days about diet and physical culture, what people do with the body, to the body, by the body, for the body, only if this vehicle lived forever. But what more could be said about the benefit and importance of one who dwells in the body, if any, or what it does by abiding in a healthy body, by learning to eat healthy food, do good exercise, sleep well also is recommended, eating well, sleeping well, and exercising well. And recently someone has added that they should meditate as well. It should have been there in the first, but it's been recently added. So my topic tonight is leaning on to the importance of the mindfulness in general and particularly of speech. Often what we say informs the world and the people around us, what our attitudes or knowledge or understanding is. And we are not often aware that that will be the case. As a person who doesn't know what he's doing to his body, one who's not mindful of what he says, isn't aware that what impression will people make of themselves when they say something. This topic is inspired or motivated by the degree of depression in society. And often people would like to know what are the causes of depression. And of course there are, as everything else, there are many, many causes for depression. Some may be chemical imbalances, fairly physiologically developed imbalances, but even those physical imbalances has their origin in some earlier causes, such as exposure to verbal abuse and verbal violence by senior or parent or people one work who are senior in positions or whatever. People's exposure to verbal violence and verbal abuse has often caused huge setbacks to people's confidence, people's overall courage or determination, because they have been blamed or criticized or spoken badly about unnecessarily. There are a lot of people when they do study that how many people do recall experiences of being verbally abused and how depressed they have been ever since, particularly by someone they respected or loved or cherished or worked with, and their morale or confidence has never been allowed to rise again due to verbal abuse. So this topic, therefore, is how can we best understand causes of mental illness, such as violence, abusive speeches. So what is mindfulness? Before we talk about mindfulness of speech, when we talk about mindfulness, it talks about the person who is using his or her mind needs to be fully aware what it is that their mind holds a great power to unleash something good or something harmful or something neutral. People aren't aware of their thoughts or of themselves because the mind is the one that actually dictates the five senses, or sometimes five senses would influence the mind in return, so that the person supposed to be mindful of anything is not mindful of what he sees or hears or perceives, because what he sees is colored by his own mindlessness of it. His afflictions, his anger, negative emotions can cloud and obscure the perceptions. What a person sees or hears or even says are often colored and obscured by their lack of awareness to the cause of their mental information. One who is mindful, who has the mindfulness of that, instead has the awareness how he has registered these informations, whether valid or invalid or otherwise. He assesses and observes the contents and validity of those informations before the information is outputted physically, verbally, or emotionally, or intellectually. There is an internal process when the mindfulness exists. The person who hears something or who sees something, when he's mindful of what he hears something, for instance, he becomes aware whether what he heard is true or facts or motivated by anger or jealousy by the speaker. Therefore, the actual thing may have little or no relevance what they're talking about. It's completely intoxicated by their own excessive negative affliction. So when we are aware, for instance, what we're hearing, we become mostly aware where what we hear is originating from. We partly recognize how our own negative emotions or positive emotions are assisting to us to assess the information. When we ourselves very clear and very highly resolute mind that has a very discerning mind to hear what we're hearing, we could distinguish between what is part of that is our own projection, what part of that is actually the creation of the whatever the person says. So there's amazing demarcation between having to believe or reject or merely accept it as a story that they happen to having to tell because they happen to be under that cloud. That is the reality under which they are there. And therefore, a person who is mindful of hearing, for instance, wouldn't say, I heard him say that, and don't go straight away jump into the 100% factuality of what they heard. They would realize that how much of this is my own vulnerability or naivety of any listeners, that often people become completely influenced by one spell of what they heard or what they read, and how many are infectiously influenced by one thing they read or read on the newspaper or read somewhere else, not realizing that how it was manufactured, by whom, with what intent. Whereas when a person who is mindful will be aware of that, and therefore will be cautious as to how far he reacts to it, and makes himself therefore become perpetuated. He becomes less endangered as a person who is totally hooked by that. Like a very experienced fish. I don't know whether there is an experienced fish or not, who has seen a hook come down with a little worm attached to it. He has probably tried before, and he knows there was a hook. Next time when he sees, he wouldn't go to it. Most fish, of course, do not have such intelligence. They go straight to bite the hook, and there it gets caught. Now, how many mindful fish-like listeners we can be in our everyday? Every day, what we hear is whether it's heresy or whether it's something truly useful. Often, when we are mindful, it's often very clear. If it's very beneficial for us to take something what we hear, it's largely weighed by our own positivity and mindfulness. When we are mostly stocked with positive attitudes and thoughts, and then what we hear is very much processed by that positivity, and therefore we will screen it through our own positivity, and because of that, we will not fall prey to the heresy, or to the gossip, or to the slander, or to the whatever people happen to be saying. So when we are mindful of that, therefore we become less of our ear doesn't become easy victim of some voice you heard to be true. We have an intelligence that resides within the ear, not just on the earlobe, that actually screens those informations. So when we're talking about mindfulness of speech, we're not talking about mindfulness of just ourselves as a speaker, but mindfulness of hearing the other people speak, particularly in extreme situations. You could very, very much tell whether they are extreme or whether they are reasonably acceptable data or information. For instance, if you ask somebody to find your way, which street, how do I get to such street? And when you ask somebody, you can tell straight away whether the person telling you knows the direction or not. You don't have to doubt a lot about that kind of things. They are not extreme. Person will say either he knows or he doesn't know. Pretty much, So when we are mindful, we become fairly good processor of information. The information we gain are usually very raw and often manipulated or manufactured by some other causes and conditions. So when a person becomes very mindful of that, his overall sixth sense consciousness itself is very mindful. When we talk about mindfulness of speech of ourselves, we're talking about mindfulness of the physical component of the body, because when you use mindfulness of speech, you have to be mindful of your speech organ, all the way from throat to the palate, to the lips, to the teeth, to the tongue, and the breath and the sound that you make it all to make it happen. We got pretty much control system so that we don't say much. if we wanted to be physiologically, if we wanted to sort of not want to say anything, physically we can stop. But the physical stoppage from saying something has to be mindful. It has to be done by the mindfulness of, if I'm going to say this, it's going to be harmful. So therefore, one becomes more conscientious about the mental component of the speech, which is the intention, cognitive of the thought, words, and phrases, and the power that your word and phrases will have to influence someone either positively or negatively. Because if you wanted to influence someone positively, you have to have positive intent, and you've got to be mindful of that positivity. And if you don't look for the positive intent in you, you could not guarantee a positive influence. But if you're not looking for the positive intent, you couldn't detect the negative intent. That might just come through without you detecting it. So often when we're not mindful, then the negative intent actually takes form of a positive intent, only to confuse us, thinking it's going to benefit us or the person, but in reality it does little or no benefit. So when we're mindful of our speech, therefore first we become mindful of the cognitive, the thinking mind, before we do the speaking. And so there is a little very, very active mental process going on, cognitive mind of the words, the appropriateness of the words, and appropriateness of time and a place and a people in which situations. Even if we have the right intent. Even if I have the right intent, the appropriateness of the person to whom can I say this? Is anybody else next to him? Is it appropriate for them to hear this? When we consider all these things, there's a lot of consideration of gentleness and responsibility, mindfulness of not only internal cognitive of one's thoughts, because whether it's positive or not, whether it's negative or not, whether it's appropriate as a place, whether it's appropriate as a person. It's particularly the person that they are very vulnerable, very unstable, very negative. They are like that. If I say this, how would it do? What would it do to them? So we become mindful of that. So because of that, our intent itself become process. Because mindfulness is a more like a quality control of our thoughts before it is outputted into action with deeds or words, for instance. In this particular case, mindfulness of speech. Because firstly, when you do talk about mindfulness of speech, mindfulness of speech is audible speech. To make it audible, it has to be articulated verbally. You can't mentally say, I hate this person. You can say that, but the person thankfully doesn't get it. or you say, I like this person, I respect this person. You say this. If a person happens to be looking at you, maybe there's a little connection happening, but body language might happen. But unless mindfulness speech is audible, so therefore it starts with the vowels, consonants, words, and phrases, and not only that, something audible. You can't just mumble. I can't just mumble without this loudspeaker. For instance, I have to make it audible, communicate to the other person, so it is delivered. So therefore, it has to be articulated very clearly. So when we talk about cognitive, neuro-linguistically speaking, first we have to think linguistically. Linguistically, we have to think, and then we have to linguistically speak. So audible language is quite different from neurolingual process of processing what word to say, and can I say this? Is this appropriate to him, to this person in this situation about this? So when you consider all of these, you become a lot more careful and caring, and that mindfulness has a caring component of the consequences that the mindful person has imposed. At the same time, the person become more reflective and aware, introspective of the emotional component of the would-be speaker, whether he is happy, whether he's calm, whether he's joyful, whether he's very altruistic in intent, or whether he's depressed or sad or upset by something. So he has to be also look at his emotional component. Even the thing he wants to say might be very necessary, but his own emotional situation is so disturbed, so agitated, that he wouldn't really do a good in saying that. Now, the person who does not take into account of the emotional component of his mentality, whether it's very balanced, whether it's I-centered communication, or I care about you, the person we're speaking to, about focus. So whether there's a caring kind of component to the spoken to, or the spoken about, or whether I need to tell this to you. Doesn't matter what you think. Doesn't matter what other things, but I have this need to tell. So that shows that shows a very strongly charged, aggressive, emotional component. If the speaker is not aware of his own aggressive, emotional component of that, he's not going to do very much good what we're going to say. So, therefore, one has to take stock of the not only emotional component, emotional state of one's own mind, and that's what they say in actual mindfulness. You have to pause. First, you have to pause before whatever you're going to do or say, or even think. Even before thinking, you've got to pause. Even before thinking, you say, "Please pause before think." If you pause before think, then you will be observing the actual thinking that you have in a mind. If you did a good pause and a good thinking, then you will truly know how important that it is that your mind is processing a language maybe. And then one need to know that whether that information that you have is deeply in the head or in the heart. Now, when you feel from your heart, the information that you had would not disturb you very much because it's a safe organ in the heart. But most people, when they know something, they don't feel. They just intellectually judge. So they judge. When they judge in the intellect, there is no heart. There's no heart from which it comes to caringly think and feel what would be like if I was said that to me. And wouldn't even put himself ever being an object to being said by others. But whereas one who does the feeling bit of it, after he knows, but he would like, if I was said like this by other people, well, how would I receive it? So that's the feeling component. So you pause, observe, know, and feel. Because of that, then you are now able to see what you thought. When you process at the heart level, when you feel, then you have a much more heart and head connected examination happening. And therefore, the pausing has enabled you to sift through the information and the purpose, and mostly the intent. Intent itself is now examined. The intent itself may previously be charged by strong anger or strong negativity or very unsettled feeling. Whereas the person who has done the pausing and observing and knowing and then start to feel, then he realizes, he puts himself in the place of the other, and then he modifies what he will do or say. Now that ability to do all of that, usually most people don't have, isn't it? So mindfulness, when we talk about if there is any degree of mindfulness. So if the person is mindful, he knows whether it's positive intention or negative intention. When he's able to recognize his a negative or positive intention by pausing and observing and knowing and feeling, then the negative intent has a chance of being I would say, muted down. And therefore, person sees the inappropriateness for me to express this feeling. It's so negative. What's going to get benefit from it anyway? So therefore, you have the calmness to iron those unsettled feelings, negative feelings, and then one could see that I'm glad that I can stop at this level. If it was expressed, if this feeling was expressed, would have a terrible harm and negative consequences. So he or she could foresee the negative consequences of the expressed, difficult, negative feeling. Now, this becomes very, very important, particularly with regard to who you're speaking to or about. Then you might see it might even be about your mother, or it might be about someone that you have a great friendship with, and recently you are so upset by something. When you take that into consideration, you say, I'm not going to say this about her. So therefore you realize that this will be a very emotive reaction to say, and will yield a little of no benefit, but only harm, and harmful consequences would come from there. Therefore, mindfulness of the thought and feelings by careful observation and this pausing that one is doing empowers the person to cancel what he was going to say. Yeah? And maybe modify. If you need to say something, modify it. But maybe if you have great degree of happiness, not saying at all. You will have say, if I didn't say at all, a few minutes later I'll have a happiness that I didn't say that. But if I did say that, you feel like you have to say it out of your chest, but you don't know how bad you will feel later on. You got nothing out of it, but only harm has caused. Now, one who can consider not only these things, not only at the causal, emotional level, in the cognitive level, negative or positive cognitive level, intentional level, but also their ability to pause, observe, know, and feel, and then modify. When they're able to do that, they're also able to stop the consequences from occurring. Now, a lot of the harm people have caused, where I was giving example of people who have been abused, exposed to verbal abuse by somebody, not everybody has the tolerance, and wisdom, and compassion to take verbal abuse very, very easily. Most people take such verbal abuse very heavy tolls, more harder than physical abuse. Physical abuse is just maybe a little scar or a little bruise, but it is usually forgotten quite quickly. And verbal abuse seems to stay very deeply lodged in the heart of the feelings, like a splinter in the middle of your flesh. Lots of people keep remembering what people said that to them, and therefore their time with them will never be same, because it was completely poisoned by that. There are a lot of loving relationships has been completely destroyed by someone's irrational verbal, I would say, outburst. I'm sure everybody will be able to recall certain instances with someone close to ourselves who have said something, or we have said something quite unkind. How ever since that friendship never stayed. That shows how big a harm or suffering or pain is caused by unmindful speech and violent speech, abusive speech, spiteful speech, slanderous speech, whatever they might be. Now, the person who learns to practice this mindfulness of speech, first of all, have to look at the two things. One is benefit of speaking persuasively, encouragingly, harmoniously, caringly, and very generously. When you recall some instances where somebody has done that to you, how much difference it made to your work or your time with them or with them, and how much it encouraged you, how much it inspired you, how much support it gave you. When you think of that, so it's very good to remember when somebody speaks to you very lovingly, how much supported, how much understood, how much care that you found being given. When we talk about practicing loving kindness or compassion, what do? You just hug, or every time you think you have compassion somebody, you have to hug. Then we have to be this like the mother who goes and hugs the whole world. To say that you love everybody, you hug everybody. Then we have no time but to hug each other all the time. But most people when they are not not supported and rejected, unloved, unrespected, is because we're saying something bad to them or about them, or doing similar things. So you can draw quite a few good examples of times when people spoke kindly to you or about you, how much that encouraged you, inspire you, give you the moral dignity and confidence and harmony and pleasantness and friendship that you felt from them. Whereas when a person did the exact opposite, how did you feel? Being completely unloved, unrespected or rejected. When you feel that, how is it like to be treated like that? So one need to use these two very examples very clearly and how does one goes about practicing mindfulness of speech. Now, whatever the past experience one has had will be ample enough for us to see the importance of practicing mindfulness speech. So much so that when we are saying something fairly neutral and something unharmful, you don't have to be very mindful. You just say whatever the fact is. But when it concerns with a very negative slant, with regard to speaking unkindly to, or about, or against, or behind someone's backs, or whatever that it is, if one is not mindful, the negative consequences of karma that one creates is not just to the immediate people, but how much actually it does to one's own character as a person. So, when a person becomes mindful, first of all, what he knows is he understands his thoughts, whether they are coming from good intention or not. He knows his good intention, but sometimes untested good intention often is the cause of mindlessness of speech, because they said they have good intention, but in the meantime, good intention doesn't tally the actual speech. The speech itself is very harsh, or very critical, very negative. Who's going to know there is a good intention? Who's going to get the benefit of the good intention they so think they have? But the actual output is totally contrary to the intention they think they had. So therefore, the good intention people think they have are often obscured by their righteousness, by their aggression or anger or resentment or jealousy or negativities. They think they have a good cause, for instance. They think they have a good cause for the reason of which they're going to do. And they might even have the reason to think like that. But when it's untested, this is what I mean by knowing and understanding. When do you truly understand that intention, though appears to be very altruistic, when you really look at it, it is motivated by not altruism, but by anger, but by jealousy, but by resentment. Very few people will know that unless they are mindful of the intention. So, mindfulness of intention is very important, rather than mindfulness of anything else. Words or action is a mindfulness of intention, because mindfulness intention is only scrutinizable by the person who intends to do. So if he or she is not mindful, there will be no way of knowing it is right or appropriate. So possibility of getting it wrong is more great chance. If the person in question who's doing it haven't done the scrutinizing, who's going to know who's got a wonderful intention? Who's going to accept that? Particularly if it doesn't tally with the kind of action that he or she is outputting. So therefore, we alone must be responsible. Like the person who has to be responsible for what he introduced to his body. Likewise, the person must be responsible for the intention that he has before he output that in words or phrases or whatever he does. So therefore, the mindful of intentional component of speech, for whose benefit, and how it will benefit if I did this, if I said this. One has to challenge that amazing intention that we have. Intentions are often said to be usually good, but the method of delivery, or if a self is abrasive, abusive, or violent, or slanderous language, it's not going to benefit, because people are not going to benefit from our good intention. People are only going to be rubbed against our abrasive words or phrases that we use. People can't say, thank you so much for your good intention. Nobody said that to us. Nobody said, thank you for your good intention. I know you have very good intention. You screamed at me, but you have really good intention. Nobody says that. For instance. So if you get screamed at by people, they say, why did you scream at me? They would never say, oh, you must have a good intention. You screamed so loud. Nobody said that. See, this shows that mindfulness speech is a social responsibility. It's not about how appropriate we are. So therefore, mindfulness speech is a social responsibility, whereas mindfulness of intention is a personal safety, really, personal safety. If the intention is stay in the content, when you actually output the socially responsible action, if you were to do that, then of course the content of the action of the right speech, a kind speech, encouraging speech, people will say that how beautifully you said it. You don't even have to say it was from good intention. People can experience that it was such a caring and such a compassionate, such a tolerant, such a forgiving way that intention has composed that statement. So people will be able to know that. Therefore, it's important too that we alone must be the person who scrutinize our intention before we say. When we are not checking our intention, there's every chance that what we say is completely obscure by less than desirable, acceptable intention. So when one is able to do that, one understands that the feeling that it will produce if we say this, because felt feeling is different from expressed feeling. The felt feeling is an individual domain. Expressed feeling is out there, as I said before. 5% hears it, 5% will be affected by it. Whereas if we just feel in our own mind, and there are a lot of times, I'm sure all of you have experienced, a lot of times you felt something, but you really had the, thank goodness, kindness or whatever prevented you from saying that, and you didn't harm anybody by having a tight-lipped at that occasion. You would have done that quite a number of times when we are in good space, even without having heard mindfulness speech. We are often mindful of speech, isn't it? But how could we improve that mindfulness speech to bring to a level to be able to detect the early signs of aggression and anger or jealousy obscuring our motivation, and therefore make us believe as we have some altruistic intention when actually we don't. When one is not aware of that, there is no benefit, there is no mindfulness speech, because the speaker isn't aware of the mindfulness of intention. He hasn't understood the meaning. He hasn't understood the feeling it will produce to the speaker, to the person that they are talking to, and about, and how it will be reported by others, and therefore his need to speak is not so important. His need to not to speak is important. So some people say, I need to say something. But they don't realize that their need not to speak is just as important. Particularly if you will consider future and the consequences thereafter. So we're talking about how realistically we can be. Therefore, the intentional component of speech is very, very important. And particularly when you become exposed to someone's verbal abuse, when you have been mindful like that before, then you will see, this person might have so much good intention, but where he put it is so uncharacteristic of the intention that he might have. Therefore, I'm not going to be offendable by this. He knows not what he's saying. So it's no point criticizing, no point correcting, no point rejecting. Just hear from this end, let it go from the other end. Don't keep anything in between. So therefore, this isn't that you are ignoring them. You're not ignoring them. Your non-reaction is not ignoring them. It's non-reaction, it's proaction. It's tolerance. Tolerance is often accepting the hardships on the occasion in order to prevent further suffering by overreaction. So one must therefore understand with the intention that I'm not reacting to this I'm not reacting to this in order to reveal the foolishness of the person who has said this to me. That shouldn't be our intention. I'm not reacting to this because it can't bother me. I'm much higher than this person's state of mind. That would be too arrogant. There's a lot of time people don't say anything with this kind of intention. They just totally ignore you, and that's not mindfulness speech. That could be just totally ignoring you or not caring about you. So when you're practicing tolerance, they have to have a strong component of positive emotion, compassion. You have to be very kind to the troubled and anguished mind which is speaking you like that. And understand that this is a dream in which caused by some kind of sleep they have got. They must have taken the sleeping tablet of anger or hatred or resentment or whatever. They must have taken one too many tablets, and so they are dreaming. So, of course, don't say that to them, of course. If you can remember that, look, people can be easily influenced by some negative thoughts, and they happen to be like that in that spell. Hopefully, they will not stay in this spell very long, and hopefully I do not exacerbate these by my childish overreaction. If you have that, then I'm sure there are a lot of times, I'm sure everyone would have done that. A lot of times you were practicing tolerance to somebody out of sheer kindness for your child or for your mother or loved one because you happen to be in a very good space. See, that good space is reclaimable only by mindfulness. See, mindfulness is not remembering where the key is. It's just reconnecting what we have to do. So it's not only knowing what is in jeopardy, but at the same time, what could you do to not to let us escalate that? And often it requires tolerance. So mindfulness speech means not only us who become mindful of not saying something harsh or reactive or instigate anybody, but even when somebody is saying something fairly instigative, fairly provocative, you actually do not go into their space. You know where their space are, but you make sure that you do not get wallowed by that. But you realize what a difficult situation they are in by themselves. Some pressure from work, maybe pressure from this. It's probably nothing to do with me, but a lot to do with other things. That's a good idea, thinking like that. Good idea to think like. Most people, what happens, somebody is very harsh on you, they think it's to do me. And straight away they become, it's me, I'm in trouble. I didn't do anything. What dare do you say that to? So they become very, very defensive. So mindfulness speech is not a defensive practice. Self doesn't need to defend it. There is no self. There's only a pair of ears. It's the behavior of the ears you have to talk about. So the self is not going to be hurt because there is no self. Where's the self going? Where's the self that got hurt? Is the ears turning red or what? What is really getting? Who's getting the hurt? Who's receiving the blow? Self or the ear? If you didn't hear nothing, you didn't get hurt. So it's the ear's problem. So don't wear the hearing aid at all. Just turn down the hearing aid. Don't. So what we're talking about is, this is anguish and trouble of this person from whatever other things that he is troubled by. He just needed someone to vent it out, and I just happened to be in the wrong place. And therefore I have to be kind and make sure that I do not make them to go exacerbated by my poor reaction. So I have to be and attached to it. When you do that, then you become mindful what you think and what you feel rather than what the person said. So the mindfulness is not what they said, but what you're going to think and do and know and observe, so that you do not let the flood come into you, that you actually stop it before it comes to you. A lot of people do not realize what they should do or shouldn't do. They think what the other person is making them to say. So they have totally given the power to the other to make us to say this. People say, you don't press my wrong button. Well, why did you put the wrong button so near to them? So most people think it's the other person's doing the things to us. But if mindful person says, look, it's my response, that is the one determine the outcome. They can provoke or do whatever, but if I don't clap my hands with theirs, there will be no clapping of hands. However much closer their giant hand comes towards you, if your little one doesn't touch it, there will be no clapping of hands. So with that is what we call personal responsibility, saying that's their karma, but if the two negative person collides with the both negative, it will be create a big negative karma. If one try to provoke negatively, if other person try to pacify that by whatever hook or crook you can do, by kindness, by tolerance, by compassion, whatever it is, you just he just doesn't know how to spell or whatever. Oh, he's using too much vowels there. So you just pretend that he's just reading vowels and no consonants. So when you hear words, usually people think that he said that, but maybe he didn't say that. What makes us to think he said that? See, when we are vulnerable, we hear all sorts of things. When we are positive, we don't hear those things. Amazing thing about it is how mindfulness can screen off those vulnerableness of offendableness in us, and therefore we don't become so offendable. We don't become so volatile. Our own volatility is caused by our own negativities, which we could not contain. So when we are just as negative as they are trying to make us, then we will not be mindful of what they say. How can we be mindful of what we're going to say? We're not mindful of what they're saying, what is intending them to say. How could we be mindful of what we're going to say to them? It's going to make it better. So to be mindful of what we can do to to better the situation, we have to be mindful what is they saying that is actually making them to feel the way they feel. You basically have to know what the results of their thinking, cognitive thinking, is making them feel without realizing they are themselves made to feel by their own thinking. So you have to be mindful of the other person, so feeling how that came about. So therefore, mindful is in many ways a different, higher level of consciousness, which assess the actual experience of the person who unconsciously now outputting such abrasive expression. When you know that, but one who you are mindful, you say, "This is my dad. He cares about me. He loves more than he." So this is my dad. You've got to remember this is my dad, because sometimes we don't remember he's my dad. We remember he's some terrible person. You just call him terrible person. Because it's depends what your linguistics labels the person. If you think my kind dad or something, it will help you. If you think this is my kind dad, how come he's saying this? Oh, he must be in trouble. He must need my help. But if you think this terrible person, he didn't have to say much. He's already terrible. See how our own language therefore makes us to see or hear before they say or do much. So this interdependent origination in Buddhism is very important. When you hear something, it's not really what they say, it's what you took it to be. And so when someone says something, to you, if you're in a positive mood, when someone criticizes it, they say, "Thank you." Sometimes people beg for criticism when they're needing to improve themselves, because they can't know how to improve themselves. So if somebody criticizes, they say, "Thank you." So you can see it's even criticism can be heard as an advice, isn't it? Criticism can be heard as advice when we are in a kind of very receptive and very positive mood. So what the person says or what the word they come out of from their mouth has very little thing if we didn't give the weight of negative or positive relationship with how we relate it to be. So how we relate to that, mindful of relating to what we're hearing that to be. It said that when a person who is, say, when we are mindful of being exposed to someone who is saying a few things that is likely of disturbing us, when you see, who is this? This is my dear father or something. If you remember that totally will scale down the severity of the contents of what he's saying. This is my poor dad, or this is my sick child, or this is my only whatever. You start, when they say, you can almost play it down by the very positive, I would say, notation, that recognition that you have given to the identity. So, but if you see that this person is going to harm me, and then see him or her as some harmer to us, then we have already given that status to harm us. We already become offended by virtue of being exposed to them, because we are already relating to them as a negative. So because we have related the object as negative, then only we are relating to the object only negative, you know. Some people say, why are you looking at me? When we relate to somebody as negative, why are you looking at me? Why are you staring at me? But when we are a little interested in the person, we want to really know the person, when they look, we also smile. Amazing. But when we don't want to talk to those people, why are you looking at me? See, the person didn't do anything. He just had to look somewhere. You see? So it depends. What we see is what we're thinking, really. What we're thinking makes us to hear things. What we're thinking makes us to see things without the person actually intending to be like that or saying that. So that shows how important it is, largely, that we have to be mindful as what we are reading, what we're hearing. So mindfulness of hearing we're talking about here. When we are mindful of hearing, we're mindful of how much of that is conjured up by our own mind. When you think about that, then you become less possessive about that. You say, oh, that's my thinking. That's my attitude that is I'm hearing. When you do that, you're much more capable of owning it or disowning it. Because you yourself were party to that. And an interesting thing about that is when you become mindful of what you're thinking, then you are much more in control of how offendable or how unoffendable you are. You're no longer so vulnerable. You're not so offendable because you're already shielded by your goodness, so to speak. Your goodness can make yourself shielded as if what you hear is their cry for help. Their poor way of asking for help. They don't know how to ask nicely for help. They just don't know how to ask nicely. They're actually asking for help, but they are not knowing how to ask nicely. But because you're interested to help, doesn't matter whether they ask nicely or bad, nicely or poorly, you're interested to help anyway. So because of that, because they don't even know how to ask nicely, they need your help even more. So because of that, you can actually increase your own positivity by having this vigor with which one actually relate to the object more positively. Because of that, we do not hear or believe or reject everything what they say. But what we're there is just for them to have something to express to. And that could be a mother, that could be a best friend upon whose shoulder you have said something, you have cried. People do that all the time. Sometimes we know that they're saying really foolish things, but we still cuddle them, hold them, Okay, it's okay. Do you want a glass of water? Or do you want me to open the door? Things like that. We do that quite a lot of time when we're in a good space, isn't it? When somebody's a little bit vulnerable, we're quite capable of doing that and not take it too personally, isn't it? See, we have the capacity to do that. We just have to switch that button on. Whether it's the right button or neutral button, I don't know. Must be neutral, fairly. Neutral button has to be activated to put our mind in that situation. Then you can see the volatile and unstable and the negativeness of the situation. Therefore, with the negative, when somebody is negative, when somebody's in a negative situation, there's no benefit in you also acting negatively because they got enough already. They don't need it anymore. They need something to balance that. You have to therefore positivize that, you see. And if we are that, then we have truly become. We can paraphrase what they're saying. And they might even realize, oh, that's a better way of saying it. How did I put it? And actually they didn't realize they said the word they said. They didn't know what they were saying. So how do you know that they actually knew what they were saying? Most of the time, that's what the situation is. When somebody is very, very negative, very angry, very resentful, very jealous or very vindictive, they don't know what they're saying. They're totally intoxicated by their own deluded cause. When you know that, you don't take it offense by yourself, and you have compassion to the person. So the mindfulness of the hearing makes ourselves more compassionate. How many people have said these things and fall prey to? I'm not going to fall prey to. Thank goodness I got the mindfulness of kindness to practice. When someone says harsh, hurtful things, I can practice mindfulness or kindness and tolerance, and here it really matters most. If you have really cherished and the virtue of kindness and tolerance, you can see yourself practicing that when your pair of ears are exposed to some harsh or negative language of somebody. When you can tolerate that, that is mindfulness speech. You can actually feel the difficulties is there, but the cause to tolerate that is even greater. Because you're trying to stop future sufferings and negative reactions of yours and so on. Because of how much the suffering could be prevented. Suffering, we don't want to suffer, but only if we stop the cause of it. If we stop the cause by non-retaliation is not repression here. Repression has a feeling of a fear. Fear, you fear something and therefore you don't say it. But when you are practicing tolerance, you got to know why you have to tolerate. You have to know fully the benefit of tolerance. Then you practice tolerance. If you fearfully practice tolerance, then that's what becomes form of repression. So that's why mindfulness of the virtue of tolerance and the benefit of temporary hardships. Benefit of the temporary hardships. It is good for your humility. It is good for yourself to notice the being able to stop. Because they say if you pause. If the Buddha said he teaches not only about the existence of suffering but how to stop. Yeah, we are learning to stop that by practicing tolerance. That's our small little bit we're doing. We are tolerating. Because tolerance is the highest virtue, so it is said. If tolerance is the highest virtue, and when you find yourself doing that, then the pain, the temporary difficulty you have to put up with is how many mothers have not tolerated like this? How many daughters have not tolerated to our mother like this and have had a very bad experience so many years consequently? I must make sure that this doesn't happen with here. Even if I have to put up with difficulties, may this exhaust all the karma there is. That in the past I have been intolerant or whatever. May my purpose of tolerating these however difficulty they are temporarily, may this empower me even more in the future to have such a formidable ability to practice tolerance. So we have to be very, very wakefully aware. We shouldn't be just practicing tolerance out of fear. That's no good. Fear is a negative emotion. Fear is not a positive emotion. So one has to have the benefit and hope that this will do good. Instead of saying, if I didn't do this, I'll be in more trouble type of thing. But one has to positivize why I have to practice tolerance. So mind is fully engineered or boosted by positive intent. Because there's a lot of mindfulness with the wrong intent. Producing a nuclear weapon, they produce a lot of scientists sit in a corner, mindfully researching day and night, and they're also practicing mindfulness. We're not talking about shortage of mindfulness. We're talking about diverting the correct mindfulness in the right intention. So right intention, when a person is practicing right intention and practicing tolerance, when they become exposed to verbal abuse, verbal slandering or whatever it is, they don't feel hurt. They feel compassionate to those who practice, who slander, or who are harsh and who are critical, who are negative. You can see how unaware they are of their own intent, let alone their actions, and the type of karma and the karmic consequences people experience. So talking about this, therefore, it's important to remember the negative consequences of mindless speech. Negative consequences. It is said in Buddhist teachings that the negative consequences or positive consequences. If a positive speech has a positive consequence. But there are three types of consequences. One is experiential consequences. Another is habitual consequences. And the third one is possessive consequences. First is experiential consequences. It said the person who have used verbal violence or verbal abuse and whatever the negative, unmindful speech they have used, they will not be listened to by other people, they say. karmic experiential consequences. However factual things you got to say, people will not believe you, and lose friends easily and attract enemies quickly, they say. Person who practices unkind speech. And one will not be able to enjoy any length of company of friendship very long, because one will engage in all sorts of idle negative speeches that will quickly turn upside down in no time, and they will have to feel totally self-alienated by their own carelessness of speech. And no power to persuade others, and few will show respect to you because of the negativeness of your speech. The person doesn't realize they're going to lose friends, they're going to alienate themselves, people soon realize the negativeness of person themselves makes the people don't want to associate with the person. Because of that, the person is deliberately making themselves to lose friends and therefore exposed to what you call experientially feel very alienated, very unloved, very ununderstood, and not only that, people will look down upon the person for being so negative, for being so bad-mouthed. Experientially speaking, karmically speaking, they say, people can also experience a lot of suffering to do with their throat and the mouth and the tongue, and not to mention all the other department, the teeth. I'm sure there's a lot of parts that we will cherish very much, from the throat all the way to the lips. Not to mention the quality of speech, quality of the voice, and the benefit and harm that one's voice has or doesn't have. One will only succeed to alienate oneself with others. People will not believe us anymore because they have heard enough negativities and they had enough. Therefore, however great talent or skill or career successful we might have, they become pretty much destroyed by the very bad mouth of one's own conduct. And fail to fulfill your goals. Because of that, there's very little thing you do that will be respected and cared or understood by. So therefore, person becomes very, very miserable. And it says that even you tell, nobody believes you because of the negativeness of oneself. Now, some of this karma can be ripened within very, very few years. They say, depending to the negative karma of speech, they say negative karma of speech. Not only one's own experiential karma, but experience oneself being verbally abused by other people. Wherever you go, you get verbally abused. And you don't find anybody speaking kindly to you because you're always exposed to this verbally very violent environment. Nobody speaks kindly to you or of you or about you. So therefore, the hostility coming towards us from others, verbally speaking, and so on. So there's experiential karma. Habitual karma consequences is person will do not know how to stop the negative, mindless speech, use of one's speech that are very harmful, that are very destructive, that are very unbeneficial. Person will not know how to stop it because they become so inspired as if they're doing a good cause. So because of that, they are trapped in the habitual pattern, which is called therefore habitual karma. It doesn't have to be about one or two things they are talking negative. They will be basically negative about anything. Everything, wherever they go, they only go on negative things. Whether it's workplace, whether it's government, or whether it's the house, or whether it's the suburb, or whatever, or whether their family or whatever. They're not happy with anybody because that's the language they are conjuring in the head, and they see what they're thinking around the environment. And the monologue, the talking language, the talking department language is always negative. And because there's only negative linguistics happening, therefore there is no language that can see positive things outside of them. So the whole reality or mandala of samsara, the samsara or the vicious cycle of reality becomes manufactured by the negative language. So they say not only that, people, very heavy karmic situation, people born in future lives, very poor voice, have defect in the speech, stuttering, as well as not able to actually have any voice, and so on. There's a story in one of the Buddha's discourses that there was one monk who chant the sutras or prayers. He has most beautiful voice. Everybody stops when they hear him and they listen to him. And at the same time, when they go to look at him, his facial feature is very deformed. So facial feature is very deformed, but when he sings, chanting, he's got beautiful voice. So monks couldn't understand this dichotomy, this contrast between this person's appearance and the voice. And then the Buddha was asked about the karmic consequences of this person, and Buddha replied that once in previous time, he was a merchant. This monk was a merchant. He used to travel around from east to west India, and on the road there was a big stupa being built. Stupa, Buddhist monument, was being built by a king, very big. And because it fell right on the road where he was traveling through, it was a bit awkward. Every time he was going through, there's a lot of bricks and a lot of building materials on the road, his camels and everything going. He always complained, this terrible project, this never finish. Always blocking my road. When they going to finish? So it looks so ugly, a project or something like that. So that is because he defamed, he criticized the project and whatever. He was born with a very deformed body. But later on, after how many years, the stupa was actually completed beautifully. So he was relieved to see this beautiful stupa being fully. He didn't regret what he said, but he thought, I must make an offering. So he bought a bell and gave a chime as an offering to the temple, to the stupa. So his beautiful voice came from the offering of the bell. So Buddha said, so even offering a beautiful bell for a stupa give you a good voice, but criticizing about the stupa will be born with a very deformed body. So karma is a possessive karma. This is called possessive karma and habitual. This is possessive karma because person just couldn't separate from that voice or from that form because of the specific karmas. Of course, people who do not believe in more than one life may not have to worry about that. But remember, the karma do ripen in one very lifetime as well. So people quickly have terrible things happen and then they lose their voice or whatever. This happens if the component of karma is very strongly negative. Now, having spoken about the negative consequences of negative karma of speech, we should also speak about the positive consequences of positive speeches. If you use the persuasive, encouraging, very kind, very tolerant, very forgiving, very understanding languages, if you use that, then also you will have experiential karma. You will be spoken to softly, gently, and kindly by people. And when you when you work somewhere where people are speaking kindly to you, you're much happier there because people are happy at workplace because people are tolerant, courteous to each other. So people will have a happy work environment or whatever the circumstances they may have. They may occasionally have one or two people who may be a little bit negative to you, but that wouldn't destroy your general flavor of your life's happiness. But those who are often exposed to negative verbal abuse would be very different. So what do we call experientially? You hardly get verbally abused by anybody. Even if people do, they quickly repair it. They quickly apologize. And so your duration of suffering is very short because there are such considerate people who quickly would repair those hurt and pain caused by it. And you will be greatly respected and believed and trusted and respected by people. If you say something, people will listen. That's it. Your word have weight of great degree of
weight in the reliability and validity of what you say. People will believe you more. What you say have a very positive influence on other people, whereas if somebody said it, wouldn't have the same influence. You will be able to exercise particular powerful positions that has a very positive influence on many people. Because of that, you will be able to influence many through right speech. You can influence many people to benefit others, many through your actual right speech. And also you happen to hold positions and authority and circumstance through which your speech can make huge positive changes to many people's hearing. People hear the Dharma, for instance. People hear the Dharma. They feel that, once they heard the Dharma, nothing can have such a sweetness in anything you have heard. And so you will, because you have practiced right speech in the past, you will hear good things. You will have a more inclination to hear good things. And you have a more ability to comprehend the depth and meaning and profundity of these things. Therefore, it will contract your heart much more. You will find you're reading more good materials. You find you're holding good books. You are not reading one book from cover to cover and then look for another one. You will read one book from cover to cover, read it 40, 50 times. That very book, because it's got it all what you need. So you will not be incessant reader of these unnecessary fictions. You will be read books that contains valid, holy, sumptuous information for your life's provision needs. So therefore, you will also find in your possessions books that are good, books that are good. Books that are good to give to others, books that are good to lend to others, books that you never regret buying, and therefore you will find yourself intellectually, spiritually much more informed, in a higher consciousness level, because you've been dispenser of good words, good news. If you say good things, you will hear good things. You have understanding that is good. So possessive karma of right speech is you have a really space in your heart for the higher teachings and wisdom and knowledge that pertains to practice of tolerance, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, contentment, and respect. This is the 6 words that His Holiness Dalai Lama recent years have said is more important than any fundamental religious doctrine. He said, Buddhist science helps people to reason and rationalize how to use human capacity, human intelligence. And if any higher knowledge dispenses us to practice these 6, he says that is the most practical and useful. Why? Because if you have respect, it firstly destroys religious intolerance, because otherwise religions are turning against each other as if others are wrong and path of the devil or something like that. If they promote like that, that shows no respect. How could any spiritual tradition promote disrespect for others when it is meant to practice love and kindness and mercy to all beings? How could it distinguish others as not worthy of that? So if you have respect, if you respect others, whether they believe in this or that is not the difference. Difference is the fact that they too have right to exist. And so if you respect, then you will speak respectfully. You speak language that you know will offend them, you don't say them. You know that this will not be taken nicely by others. You deliberately restrain harmful, hurtful, divisive, slanderous language because you respect others. So one is out of respect, you practice right speech, mindful speech. Another is out of compassion. If I say this to him, it will hurt him, it will confuse him, it will destabilize him. How could I say this? So therefore you treat them as a sentient being who has feelings, whose feeling will be influenced for better or worse by my saying this. How could I say something that will improve his positivity? So out of compassion, we have to practice right speech. We practice right speech. Even if we practice right speech out of compassion to somebody, but what if others don't practice kind speech to us? Then we have to practice tolerance. So you practice tolerance those who do not practice right speech to us, because their situation is a little bit dissimilar from that of ours. So we have to do the exact opposite. We don't act like them because they are disrespectful or they are intolerant. There will be no benefit of two people intolerant. When one could be tolerant, the other's intolerance could be outweighed, you see. So if we can be that, then our tolerance is only practicable virtue when someone is a bit harsh on you. If both are nice to each other, you can't practice tolerance. So therefore, tolerance is only virtue in the face of the devil, in the face of someone being not quite as good as you are. So we have to be thankful for those who give us chance to practice tolerance. If we are always mingling with nice people, you will never get to practice tolerance. So whoever is the one who gives us chance to practice tolerance, we should say, oh, this person is here for a reason. So you see, first is the respect. Out of respect, we practice right kind speech. Out of compassion, we practice mindfulness speech. And out of tolerance, we practice. But when we practice tolerance, if somebody still verbally abuses us, then we practice forgiveness. You can't forgive someone who hasn't been kind, who has been nice to you. You can only forgive someone who has been very, very harmful to you, who have been very vindictive or very critical or whatever. You have to practice tolerance to them. See? So therefore, we have to practice language of forgiveness. We have to say, I forgive you. We have to say, forgive to someone who you truly have previously found hard to accept or hard to. So one has to turn around and forgive them wholeheartedly. So respect, compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, and then the next one is contentment. We have to be contented. Generally speaking, we have to have a very contented mind. When we have a contentment in our mind, we're not wanting wonderful, uplifting, extraordinary things. We just contented what we can do today. We don't try to do many things for tomorrow, today. We content what we can do today, what we didn't, what practice of tolerance and compassion we showed today, and we feel content. We should rejoice that when we do. When a person has these factors in his or her mind, the language will be influenced by this. Language of tolerance will speak very softer, caring, positive language. One who's very, very, very forgiving language. Very contented language have not a lot of aggression there. Contented language is very appreciative language. A very, 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 very grateful language. It says a lot of complimentary things of other people. One who has a lot of contentment. One who has very, very forgiving language is very concerned, very empathetic language, because he knows that others may feel still guilty of what they have done to you, and if you don't pardon them, they may be suffering because you haven't pardoned them, you see. So it's very concerned and very, very altruistic motivation. And compassionate language is one who knows the suffering of others as much as they suffer. Addition is that we know the causes of their suffering, they don't. So the compassionate language, person who has think compassionately knows the tyranny or suffering that other is going through, including the causes of it. When we have that, then we are a little bit ahead of the person who is suffering, and therefore we are more. Their suffering doesn't become cause of our anger, or doesn't become cause of our resentment. Lots of people's resentment come from because someone caused them suffer, and then they are reacting even more aggressively to double the suffering even more. But one who has compassion prevents themselves from overreacting and creating another chain of suffering because saying there is suffering. Because one knows the suffering is itself impermanent, particularly if you knew how to. you got to know the suffering is impermanent. Suffering isn't there permanently from the object. Other than subsequent post-thinking about the suffering itself is an incident that has left. That it's like a train collision happened years ago. And then after that is all after that train collision shock. So like that, when one has this very compassionate language, there is a very respectful language. When respect the other person for who they are, just as we are, we want to be respected or considered or understood. They too want to be respected and understood, cared for. So therefore, a person who practices positive mindfulness speech has these neuro-linguistic programming happening. They only see what they're thinking. They don't hear what the people are saying very much. So that's why in Mahayana Buddhist Sutra they say there is no sound. It is when it says there is no sound, it is not denying the existence of sound, but it is saying there is no sound that you heard that inherently exists by itself. So meaning that language that you hear from what other persons say is only determined by what you're gonna think in hearing it. Every listener gets a different understanding from one speaker, because the one who's speaking has no inherently existing thing he says. It is totally dependent on how each recipient, how each hearer is going to hear that. This being the case, we have not only great responsibility not only what we say, but we hear. Because if we heard it wrongly, we would influence ourselves very obscuringly then until it is ever corrected. If it does ever get corrected, what we heard was not true or not useful and non-factual, and it is totally manipulated. It is a slander. If we didn't get to know then how long it takes to correct that damage. And this is where the mindful person who practices mindfulness acknowledges the thinking language and hearing language and then accepting language. You can hear something, but you don't have to take it all. Buddha never said, everything I said must be accepted. He said, whatever I have said, you mustn't accept it on the face value because I said so. You must test it and examine it and verify it, just like a goldsmith tests the yellow metal before purchasing it, paying the price of it. Likewise, you must not accept just because I've said so. So now, if the Buddha was very cautious, because Buddha haven't said many things people find difficult. So when he was saying that, he's actually highlighting the naivety of people in hearing and believing what they hear, and then reacting and acting and overreacting as a result of what they heard. So whether it's praised and loved by many, praising to you or disparaging to you, one mustn't think it's anything to do with you. It has a lot to do with what they think of you. But what you like is you know yourself best. You don't have to argue with them because both are entitled to a different perspective. People have different perspectives. We don't have to own theirs, and they don't have to own ours, and we keep ours and they keep theirs. When you have that, people agree to not agree, they say. That's a good thing about it. And you don't have to totally agree with everything. And sometimes even when we hear something that is bad to us, that is harmful to us temporarily, but actually it's good for us that we become exposed to such things as well. Because if we only exposed to praise and respect and kind, we might say that's a good karma because you've been fantastic in the past, so you are surrounded by people who only speak kindly to you. But wait a minute, you learn a lot also when somebody is critical to you, because somebody is critical to you, then you realize you've been so spoiled in praise and compliment. you don't realize how much many there is to learn from exact opposite. Because people are entitled to the different perspectives. And so therefore, even when we become exposed to criticism, we don't become so reactive and defensive about it. Because they're entitled to their point of view. And their point of view is largely colored by their thought. And you're not going to tell them that. And they should take time to know that. So we shouldn't waste our time saying, that's your projection. And they will say, that's your projection. And then they say, so they will be just slinging match saying, that's your projection, that's your projection. So there will be, neither of them are hearing each other. Neither of them are hearing each other because two persons saying at the same time. But at least one kept quiet. And because the other person is saying, it's your projection, you can say, yes, I'm changing it. Yes, I'm changing it. Yes, I'm changing it. So, you see, you're allowed to change your projections, Because it's a projection, it is changeable. Projection is not the thing. It's a projected. So because of that, you don't take it too offensively. If somebody says your projection, you say, oh, I must be in that state of mind. Wait a minute, can I retune it? Yeah, I'm sure you can go out of tune quite a lot of time, don't you? So it's quite natural that they caught you when you are out of tune. So it's good to know that someone telling you that you are out of tune. Because the person who is themselves in the right tune, they wouldn't know that you are in wrong tune. Because he will be too much caught in that. So because of that, there is also benefit in being exposed to such. So positive benefit of right speech is that we become much more kinder when we next time become exposed even to verbal violence of other people. We realize this is the moment where I practice tolerance, isn't it? You don't say that tolerance is important, but until you find yourself doing it. Then you find the verbal violence or unmindful, mindless speech of other people that people practicing not only increases our cautiousness, but at the same time it gives us greater degree of compassion when we are in front of people. So what I would like to highlight is that important is knowing, understanding, feeling, and needing to speak or not speak at all. When you realize that, then you will say, why? Why? To protect people and their feelings and their perceptions. Because you realize if you're going to say something, it's going to hurt people, their feelings and their perceptions, and their whatever other things are. So because of that, you will have good reason to restrain from saying harsh, hurtful, slanderous, negative, particular heresies. And therefore, what are the things that you need to restrain? Or restrain blaming, criticizing, spiteful, slandering, speaking on the back of other people. Because if you think about reason why you shouldn't want us to do those things is think of the other person's other qualities. If you really want to think about, say, you run a big commentary on the person, say some other things about the person. Then you will find there's a lot of good qualities about the person as well. And so therefore you say, you're so biased, isn't it? When we happen to be in a negative mind, we want to say all these bad things, but we want to totally ignore these other good qualities of your mom or whoever, See, so the language is therefore influenced by our intent more than what our mother is or was or isn't, So our mother is only what we think. That's what in Buddhism they call mind-only school. That's only your mind that makes things appear as they do. She can't do everything right for you. It is only a matter of determination caused by your thinking. If we are thinking negatively, then we tend to relate to the object in a very negatively. And then when we are able to think about being mindful of the why we have to restrain from unkind speech, a harsh speech, and then what are the things we have to restrain, and then in front of whom? In front of whom, you have to say. Every single person that is in front of us is important. They say the most important person in front of you is the very important person as far as what you say to him. Therefore, whether this person is stable, negative, unstable, volatile situation, or this person is very stable, very positive, very amazing situation, And so when you see that somebody is in a very, very disturbed or very unhappy, very sort of stable situation, they're already very disturbed. If you're going to say something, it's going to make it terribly worse for them. It probably doesn't concern them at all, but the fact that they become exposed to our negative speech is going to make them much more disturbed and harmed and volatile than they already were. So therefore we have reason to restrain, objectively speaking, from the point of view who they are. If they're sick, they recently lost some loved ones, they've gone through some major setbacks in life, recent times, and so on. Then you say, out of kindness, I cannot say this. I've already fallen enough this life, this year. I cannot say this to him. So you, out of kindness, out of respect for them, you realize that what the strong reason that you had feeling and wanting to say is totally uncalled for. So you find a very valid reason to restrain out of compassion. Even if the person that you think in front of you is still, you feel compassionate, but you're still very angry what they did, you should practice forgiveness. See, then you have a forgiving language. You can say you forgive them. It will greatly increase their confidence, their positivity, if you say you forgive them. So therefore, the object is always either objects of love, objects of pity, or objects of respect, or objects of care, or minor they are under your care. Then you can say, I cannot say this to him, this is with my, I cannot say this to her, this. Therefore, with regard to the particular object, with this person, I cannot say that to him about her or about them. What they said, what they didn't say. Whether they said or not, is no good there that I should be telling this. Therefore, you're being responsible because you're protecting intentionally from harming this person out of your love or respect or care or concern, particularly if they are parent, particularly loved ones. Like in a situation where people don't tell somebody because they couldn't take it. So better they don't get to know it. What's the benefit of knowing something that's only going to disturb the person? There is nothing there really that is so important to know. Most news is bad news. And therefore, and when one is able to consider this in terms of person, and what you don't going to say, right now, why, and by me. Then you feel, I have the power to stop it here. So therefore, all of this, why, when, to whom, where, and so forth, is by this person. If I didn't say this and that, then everything will be protected in reality. When you have that kind of responsibility, if there is anger and hate or resentment in the thinking mind, it will be slowly be scaled down. You will see the muting of the anger. When anger is muted or anger is seized, it can turn into love. Then all of a sudden the hate turned into love, or anger turned into love, and a resentment turned into compassion and forgiveness, and therefore your whole feeling, as I mentioned at the very beginning, whole feeling has now, not only did you pause for something, this purpose of the pause has made you to become a very good observant. You become observant of your thoughts and feelings, and if they were expressed in this or that manner to this person there and then, who they are, it would have been very harmful. So, as a result of your pausing, you observe, you got to know what thing is actually in jeopardy. Because of that, you felt in your heart. You became humane. You become full human person. As a result of you thinking in your heart rather than in the head, you manage to modify. You examine and process. You sifted the facts from fiction. And as a result of that, you become fine-tuned in your own feelings and in your judgment, and therefore your language is going to be only similar to what your feelings are like. And the feeling of compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, and encouragement, all this will be the very words, very words and very phrases that you will use. hardly any very raised voice or harsh four-letter words will be uttered by that person, but rather try to see how he can scale it down. Because of that, the person becomes very, very conscientious about his thinking language before he speaks it too. When he becomes conscientious about the thought language, thinking language, of course, he feels them in his heart. If to say this, what I'm feeling in my heart, is going to benefit anybody, so you will say no very clearly the benefit of that, or harm of that. You can foresee the harm and the consequences of that. You can foresee the benefit if you output these felt thoughts and cognitive thoughts and feelings that are very generous, very kind, and forgiving, and understanding. If that is it, you will find your mouth has become like that spews pearl, because you will only say that is good, say that is good, and because your likelihood of your saying harsh is not a great danger there, because of the gentleness, softening, and the reprocessing, fine-tuning that your heart went through. So mindfulness is really heartfeltness. If there's no heartfeltness, then it is usually intellectually thinking in the head and not in the heart. People think by what it says in the book, this is right, this is wrong, that's it, type of thing. So that's not mindfulness. That's just judgment. So judgment is very harsh in either case. But the conscience with which examines it in the heart, when you actually feel it. So mindfulness of the speech is the heartfeltness of the speech. And this means words, phrases, the tone, the person, when, why, how you say this. And not only regarding that, but also how it's going to affect to other person. Because when they say the words travel fast, they certainly do. And so you realize, if you say something good, how far does it travel? If you say something bad, how far does it travel? How much benefit and harm it causes? Because of that, one therefore learns to practice mindfulness speech from the point of view of not hurting and harming and confusing and maybe upsetting other sentient beings. So therefore the mindfulness speech becomes more like an act of kindness. Even the practice of kindness, they say practice kindness. But how do you practice kindness? You can only practice kindness that affect the other person to receive through words and deeds. You can't practice kindness only from the heart. That has nothing to do with the actualization of the kindness. In Buddhism, they say that there's an intentional kindness and actualization of kindness. The intentional kindness is the training in the heart and mind, and then actualization is through words, through what we say. Even if somebody made a mess, how do you make them feel supported and kindly understood and supported? So how can we make sure that they don't feel embarrassed or something? When we have the kindness, even if the person did a huge mistake, there is amazing kindness which you try to rectify that with your gentleness, so that they do not suffer too terribly by excessive judgment and the kind of anger that you usually associate with deeds like that. When you have that, you can see how the mindfulness of the person's kindness is mindfulness. Kindness is about how we speak, how we do things, what we do physically or do verbally, and this is where in Buddhism, when we make offerings on the altars or shrines, we display various things. All of them represent various things, where the practitioner themselves are learning to have those qualities. And we usually put some musical instruments like gongs or conch or something on the shrine. The purpose of placing those gongs or instruments on the shrine, or even playing them, is really for the person to be mindful of practicing right speech. There's the best music is right speech. You don't have to play a long instrument and belong to an orchestra. And wherever we are, we could play that music. That is kind and soothing to the listener, beneficial and caring and compassionate and non-violent communication. There's a modern psychologist group someone has developed. I think I should quote her work because she's done a lot of work here. Her name is Marshall Rosenberg. She has got a PhD in non-violent communication. And according to her, the process to guide us to practice non-violent speech is, firstly, you have to be mindful how you are, yourself as a speaker, how you are. Do you feel comfortable? What you are. You have to observe your own, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and what you see in your own heart and mind. So you have to be very observant. First is observation. You have to be very observant and correct observation of what you see, what you hear, what you feel in your heart, how you are. And then the second is how these other person are for me to say these. If I say this, what kind of situation there would be better if they were to take it nicely. So you have to be mindful of how they are before you say this. If they're a little bit wonky, a little bit already disturbed, there's no benefit, even though, however, what we feel you wanted to pour it out. Maybe they wouldn't cope with it. So you have to be not only be observant of what your thoughts and feelings are before you express them, but also how would be expressed to are in their thoughts, feelings, will take this to be. So that's a subject and object observation. That's a very good point. And second point is that how you're going to express this feeling in relation to how you have observed, What you have observed is one thing, but how much of that has become a feeling in which you are already drowned, If you're too much drowned in the feelings, you wouldn't know how to distinguish from facts and fiction, you see. So often people are drowned in the feelings of theirs. They wouldn't know what it's like, what it's like for the other person to know or hear about. So therefore, most people are lost in their pool of feeling, in which they've been standing too long. They're mainly drowned in it. So they don't even know that they are already in that situation themselves. And to say that, to express that to this person, how would they feel if I say this? So therefore, what I feel, what I observe, but what I observe them to be, and how would they feel if I say this? So there's a subject-object consideration. When you become mindful of the observation of both you, who you are and how they are, how you feel and how they will feel, then what do I need? What is my need to say this? Purpose to say this. When you really question the purpose to say this, then you realize the feeling in which you are drowned because you're either too disturbed by this feeling or you wanted to change this feeling. You cannot handle this feeling. Yeah? So therefore, you have a need. What's your needs? Because I need to say this, so that we both can be put out of this miserable feeling. If the feeling itself is miserable, the purpose is to get out of that feeling rather than go deeper into it. When people are not aware of the feelings, they do not know their needs. Their needs are forgotten. The purpose is completely forgotten. The intention is completely forgotten. So therefore you reclaim, what do I really need? What do I really want by saying this? Then you're not lost in the feelings, and you're back connected with what you really want. And probably it's not quite the same as the feeling was pushing you to be. And even if that is your need, how would that fulfill their need by saying this to them? Would that fulfill their need? Probably not. How do I know their need? And Because of that, you often feel that your need and their need often are to cross purposes. Therefore, it will not benefit them if I express my need, because if I'm not considering their need for me to speak kindly to them, then even if I want to say the very thing, if I'm not speaking kindly to them, it will be their need. So how would my saying this is going to benefit them? Not at all. If my speaking hasn't benefited them, then how did it fulfill my need? It didn't. It will be jeopardize my need, and then jeopardize my feeling, and so on. So everything become worsened. And therefore, when you are truly mindful and non-violent, she says, you come to the fourth conclusion, that is a request, not an aggressive, not a criticism, not a demand, but a request. Then would you be willing to, almost like seeking the help of the other. Would you be willing to? Almost not saying, I want you to do this, but would you be willing to? Almost like you are giving them a kind of opening. It's an invitation. It's an invitation. They may not accept it. That's fine. But at least you are opening an invitation. Would you be willing to? When you open these, they could either say yes or no. Then you will see that the request is heard. The request is heard. So when you do that, they say there is a non-violent communication, and her work is quite well known. And actually, a friend of mine who I know in Melbourne does a lot of work in non-violent communication, these kind of workshops. But of course, there's going through their angle of a research and work is almost, you can see through their language. They're actually changing the language from unobserved situation. You become observant, because when you become observant, you become mindful. And then you not only become observant of the thought, but also feeling that it's producing in you and in the feelings of the other. When you do become more considerate of the feeling of yourself and others, then the needs of the both are met. Because otherwise, this person wants his needs, this person wants his needs. They're failing to understand each other's need. When one is not listening to the other's need, then that will be even harder for oneself to have our need met, particularly if we have to work with the other person. So if both does not understand each other's need, then of course there will be no communication. There will be totally aggressive communication. Neither is hearing each other's need, and therefore they're both totally ruled by their greed. Because their greed is predominating their mentality rather than what we need to do to fulfill their need. And then we are beginning to give. We are beginning to give when we are thinking of the need of other person. Because if you can fulfill the other person's need, they will be softened dramatically. They'll be on your side all of a sudden. They're just right behind you. They say, oh, thank goodness, we are here together to help each other. Exactly, that's all there. Then you feel you haven't got an opponent other than your mindlessness of it. So ignorance is only cause of mindlessness. The other people are not cause of our forgetfulness. Other people are simply a screen on which it reveals our mindfulness or lack of it. Then the need is very powerful, because then you are requesting each other. Request is a very courteous thing, isn't it? If you're requesting, it's not a demand, it's not a blackmail, it's not a very aggressive. And when you have this courtesy of you observing your need and wishes, and then your feelings, and then being able to put it courteously in a form of request form, other person become naturally softened by it, naturally softened by the language. And when you speak kindly to someone, when you say, I'm sorry, the other person says, I'm sorry too. Amazing. Amazing thing is when one person, you don't say, I request you to say sorry to me. You don't have to say that. You say sorry, and they feel like saying sorry straight away. They're pretty sort of. I was ashamed that they weren't the first one to say sorry. So next time they say, "Oh, it's not a bad idea to say sorry more frequently than later." So when you find that, then the mindfulness language is the real art of human dignity and human qualities. Whether the person is wise or intelligent or wealthy or powerful or famous, whatever it is, if the person couldn't do that, then his happiness will be very much a rarity. But one who learns to speak courteously, kindly, it doesn't mean he's always treated kindly by other people to be happy. Even when people do treat differently or negatively, they just don't know how to request you nicely. Otherwise, they're asking you what you have to do. They're asking you to practice tolerance. They're asking you to practice generosity and kindness and forgiveness, and they're creating all kinds of situations for you to do all of that. They just don't know how to ask nicely. So why we just need sometimes just abrupt noise, abrupt information. When you're able to that communication level, they say we are hardly communicating no more than 9% through verbally. They say a lot of the communication can happen on a heart level, the mindful, the heartful level. When you're thinking those, which we were talking about, pause. The purpose we pause is we try to feel, observe, and feel the need, and then try to make it as a plead and a positive request. The process of when we are doing that, we might not be saying very much, but actually we are communicating on the highest level, on a if you say divine level, yes, light level, intelligent level, consciousness level, it's awareness level we are communicating. There may be a lot of pause of silence between two people. There's not a lot of noise because there's a lot of silence. In silence, we tend to hear ourselves better, particularly of our hearts and the need and requests. We actually know how to request. If you can get something only by requesting, you put a request. You don't put an order. So therefore, there is a question of whether you demand or you request, whether you encourage or you blackmail. So it's just question is that what kind of mindful approach we have that is softer and more gently encouraging to each other. In Buddhism, if I may conclude here, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, people learn to recite many mantras. And the mantras are actual words that they repeat. Say love, for instance. And we're not talking about any mantra tonight, but here, just love. If you have kindness, if you remember kindness as a mantra, I must practice kindness to this person. If you remember the word kindness quite a few times before you say something, or love, or forgiveness a few times before you say something, it will definitely influence your language. Influence your language because you're repeating positive words. If you're thinking positive words, then you're most likely to think and say positive languages in your mind. How can I express my love to this person? How can I practice my tolerance to this person when I'm in this situation? So because you're beginning to repeat words like love or kindness and tolerance and forgiveness and respect and contentment. Like say, if you could remember some of those words, just English words will do. English words is also mantra, by the way, if you repeat them. So there's nothing to do with Sanskrit that is more sacred, because if you don't know what it means, kindness, there's no point saying something that doesn't mean kindness, But if you can say some words like kindness, because His Holiness Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness. He didn't say my religion is Buddhism. He wanted people to remember kindness. He wanted people to remember kindness. When you remember kindness, it gives a softness all of a sudden. You totally depart from the aggressive, judgmental mentality to the heart. And when you remember that word kindness a few times, say, if you are troubled by some things, you've got a lot of feelings that are not good for you, you just feel disturbed, upset. Just think of kindness a few times. Just say kindness a few times. And I'm sure, the very word, the kindness, if you see a graffiti people write kindness, you'd be happy with the kindness with that graffiti. You wouldn't go in to erase it. But how many kindness graffitis we have? Well, it's possible. We can put those things because that's exactly what it is. People are like people create object like their mind. If we can have prayer flags says Om Mani Padme Hum or Om Jewel in the Lotus or whatever. Bit too esoteric, isn't it? Kindness. Have a modern Australian prayer flag. Kindness. Give me a break. Or whatever. You just write a few words like that. Let go. Forget it. It's all finished. Something like that. If you have some of those words, when you're journaling, you're journaling. Lots of people read journals. Just write same words a few times. Kindness, kindness, kindness. It's very good. You don't have to be so readable. It's just so obvious, so bulgingly very prominent. You don't have to write this is an intelligent article. Just write kindness in 5 lines, and there it is. It says it all. But the amazing thing is when you practice that, because the language, that word is being played up in your mind, you're replaying those words in your mind, it will influence your thinking. When you influence the thinking, it will influence your feeling. And with that thinking and feeling, you seem to have that thinking and feeling assisting you to observe with that kindness. When a person is, I hate it type of thoughts, lots of people say, I hate it. They say, I hate it. I hate it. I was in a train station. The one guy I was there not even 2 minutes. He said the 4-letter words 6 times in no time. And he was hitting the bench and all that. I was scared, I was scared, he was really, and then he's kicking with his bat, kicking with the leg on these things and saying terrible words again and again and again. Because that's what he's playing up. That's all there is in his mind. And then he can see the bench to be something to be kicked. Not just once, few times. So you can see what people usually see things, what they're thinking. And if their word is kindness and tolerance, and then I'm sure they will be much gentle to the doors and benches and to the mic and to this hall. I'm told we have to finish 9 o'clock.